Welcome back, Wheels and Movies, to the channel that between Doge, where today we're covering Kingdom Rush. Yes, this is my new obsession for the month, don't judge me. Now before you say, but whoa, I don't know what Kingdom Rush is, this video isn't for me, don't worry, I will keep that into account for people who might not know about Kingdom Rush. Although I don't expect that'll be too many of you by now. But to give you the short version, essentially Kingdom Rush is a series of tower defense games that started on Flash, but now is mostly available on Steam and on mobile, which basically is just really goddamn hard, but in a pretty satisfying way. For the most part, it is still fair. We'll get more into the kind of unique things Kingdom Rush has over other tower defense games later, when we actually cover the towers. But I will say that one of the absolute best features of the Kingdom Rush games that really helps out when compensating for the lower amount of towers compared to some other big tower defense games like Balloons is the absolutely cunning enemy design that you see in these games that really forces you to mix up your strategy. Only, as weird as this might seem, especially for a first video, I'm actually going to start with the second game, Frontiers, purely because the second game is god tier. It's not like there's any bad entries in the series. Well, actually, I haven't played Vengeance, and I hear some things about that. But it's not like there's any bad games in the Kingdom Rush series. But compared to the others, I feel like Frontiers is just the absolute top tier game in the series. In fact, I love Frontiers so much that even though I have already paid for this game on mobile, and I have already gotten 2 heroes bought on mobile out of the premium heroes that you can buy, I also bought the Steam version. Okay, in my defense, I wanted to try out every hero in the game, and if you get the Steam version, although it costs more than the mobile version, that's the definitive version of the game. It looks better, it plays better, it's balanced better, it has a lot more bugs fixed, and all the heroes that you would usually have to get with microtransactions are just unlockables in the Steam version that you just have to get to a certain level to beat. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to be playing through the Steam version, only I've played this game quite a few times. I'm not saying this to brag because, well, there are people out there that are way better than me at this game. Like, I didn't think I was, like, god tier at this game, but I thought I was pretty hot shit at this game for the most part, and seeing how good some other people have been, now I've discovered kind of Kingdom Rush YouTubers, my god, it really puts me in my place. But anyway, I have played this game a lot, to the point where I think this might be my 5th or 6th time playing the entire campaign all the way through and beating it. And, you know, I never really bothered with changing the difficulty in Kingdom Rush games, just because I'm so used to so many games where changing the difficulty does not matter. You know, you barely even notice the difference a lot of the time. And so I usually just played every Kingdom Rush game in normal. I never bothered to change it. I mean, I kind of like the idea of playing hard, but the games are already hard enough, and, you know, I thought I'll just stick with the normal difficulty. But now that I have beaten this time and time again, I think it's about time I actually try and do it on veteran difficulty. And not only that, but I think as well as that, I need to get 3 stars on every level. Essentially, every single time you play a Kingdom Rush level, if you manage to beat it with no more than 2 lives lost, you'll get 3 stars. If you beat it with no more than 15 lives, I think it is, 14 lives lost, you get 2 stars. And obviously, if you beat it but with barely any lives left, you only get 1 star. Now, I know there's a lot of games out there that have a star system like this for levels, but a lot of the time it's kind of arbitrary and there's no real reason to get the stars. It's just kind of, hey, look, you did good on this level. But in Kingdom Rush, the stars actually matter a lot because you can get permanent upgrades for your abilities and towers by purchasing them with the stars that you earn for beating the levels. Only here's the thing as well, I thought that I could do this, but what I didn't realize is, I mentioned before, usually when you change difficulty in games, you can hardly notice the difference. But in this game, oh my god, I noticed the difference. Veteran is a lot harder than normal mode, which really actually caught me off guard. But I'm enjoying it, obviously. I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but I just want to quickly mention these enemies, these Gorillons. I remember that these always seemed kind of underwhelming and pathetic to me when I played the game originally, because despite them being such a big, intimidating unit, I seemed to kill them really easily every single time I played. On Veteran, these things are the bane of my existence. They seem to just walk through everything and tank every hit. So the basics I'm pretty sure you'll pick up pretty quickly. There is enemy, there is tower, defend. So instead, let's go over the 4 tower... Wait. Only 4? Yeah, this might come as a surprise to you if you are new to these games. But there are only 4 towers in these games, and there are never any more.
Not if I have anything to say about it.
There are never any more. And this can come off as a big turn-off. I remember when I first started playing Kingdom Rush, I kind of thought, like, okay, this seems well made, but, like, this doesn't seem like it's going to be a very fun game because there's only 4 towers. Why did they put so much effort into making a tower defense game and only put 4 towers in? I still had the kind of casual approach to tower defense because obviously I've been playing Bloons Tower Defense for so long. But trust me, you'll come to realize that with the enemy design in this game, they make these 4 towers extremely important all in their own rights, to the point where it doesn't really feel like 4 towers isn't much. Also, of course, they've got a lot of varied upgrades, which you'll see later. And of course, as a hard tower defense game, Kingdom Rush is going to require you to do a lot of micromanaging. So, how are we going to do this, besides just, selling or rebuilding towers on the fly? Mostly through these 2 abilities, Reinforcements and Rain of Fire. In later games you got 1 or 2 more, but for the most part, every Kingdom Rush game just has these 2 abilities that you can use all the time. Reinforcements drops 2 little soldiers onto the track to fight for you and help slow down enemies, and is probably the most crucial ability in the entire game. It might not seem like this is very much, but this ability only has, I think, a 10-second cooldown, which compared to the Rain of Fire ability, which is much stronger but has a 90-second cooldown, I believe, it's much more reliable that you can constantly place reinforcements and just constantly be able to put 2 soldiers down almost any time you want in a spot to stop enemies and slow them down, even if the soldiers themselves can barely kill anything, is super useful and often extremely clutch, and will save the day when you are like seconds away from dying. Suddenly, when the last enemy is about to get through, you'll just often just get your reinforcements in time and be able to block them for just a long enough time right at the exit that one of their towers can finally get the last shot on it. As I say, the reinforcements though are really weak unless you upgrade the ability, and when it's fully upgraded they do get a bow and arrow, which is quite powerful as well, but you would have to spend a lot of stars to do that. And Rain of Fire just rings down fiery meteors wherever you tap that deal a lot of damage and a little bit of splash damage as well. They can be a little bit difficult to aim sometimes, especially at flying enemies, since it can be kind of hard with perspective to tell where this hitbox is supposed to be. But yeah, it's essentially a really high damage ability that you can use if you've got a cluster of enemies that's about to get through. If you've managed to get them all tightly packed into one area, you can kill them all very easily by dropping a Rain of Fire on them. It's very powerful, but as I mentioned, it's got a much longer cooldown than reinforcements. 90 seconds, as to say, I think it is. Overall, I would say that unupgraded, this ability really sucks. It doesn't do all that much damage, as well as, of course, having the extremely long cooldown, but it gets a lot better once you upgrade it so that it leaves fire on the ground after it's finished, because that fire does a lot of continuous damage, especially to groups of enemies, and is also really good against some enemies that are really low health but have something else that makes them a great threat, like extremely fast speed or the ability to insta-kill your soldiers. Once you get the upgrade that leaves fire on the ground when the meteor is done, it means that you can often use the meteor to kill some big enemy, and then if there's those tiny kind of enemies running behind it, then you don't even have to hit them with the meteors, they'll all just die to the fire in front of them. Well then, I don't think I can stall any longer. You're all up to speed on what Kingdom Rush is, so now I have to do it. I have to try and beat Kingdom Rush Frontiers, getting 3 stars on every level on veteran difficulty. Well, actually, I say that, I kind of already started. This background footage has been me doing the first couple levels on veteran difficulty, although you may have noticed, this may only be level 3, but I've already died 2 times in this footage. Yeah, I told you, veteran isn't messing around. I actually can't believe that I was losing on the 3rd level, because it's just that much more difficult. That being said, this wasn't a massive roadblock that completely stopped me from being able to complete this challenge, but it just took a few tries. I kind of just skipped over the first 2 levels, because the first levels of any Kingdom Rush game tend to be a little bit dull. Mostly because the cool part about Kingdom Rush are the tier 4 upgrades you unlock for each tower, which completely transform them into something different. You get 2 for each tower, but you can only pick 1 path. But of course, early on in the game here, we haven't unlocked any tier 4s, so all we have are the 4 basic towers and upgrades that just increase their stats. This usually also means that the early game is very easy, but in this case, not quite so on veteran. You see, the other reason I also skip past the other levels is the fact that the enemies really weren't that tough. There's desert thugs, which have nothing special about them. They're basically just cannon fodder. They're just the generic enemy that you get to kill easily. The only thing they have is if they get lucky and hit high numbers, they can deal a decent amount of damage to your units to say that they are quite a low-level unit. But besides that, it's a pretty pathetic enemy. And the only real threat you can find is Dune Raiders, which are a bit tankier and also have some armor. These guys actually are pretty tough on veteran. It's just that while they are tough, they are very manageable. Unless you've got hordes of them, I doubt you'll be overwhelmed by them. The issue with them is the armor. Even though it only says low, armor is going to be quite an issue. Really, the only enemy we ran into that could have potentially caused a problem before level 3 were the wolves. They're pretty weak, they have very low health, but they're very, very fast. And so the best strategy by far is to use barracks to force them to stop to fight your soldiers, because they aren't going to be very strong at fighting your soldiers and they'll die pretty quick. And of course, when your soldiers have finished killing the wolf that's in front of them, they can move on to another one to block even more. These things are really easy to deal with, just have barracks. It's just that whenever you don't deal with them, they cause problems very quickly, because they move so fast they don't give you much time to react, and if one gets through, usually multiple get through. So generally quite easy to be on top of, but if you don't manage them well, they can quickly create quite a nasty problem. We didn't have too much splitting our attention in the second level though. We just had some slightly armored enemies, some slightly grouped enemies, which, artillery dealt with, and these wolves, which was pretty easy to deal with for the most part. So why is this level causing a problem then? Well, we've been introduced to 2 new things in this level. One being the Immortals. Now, these enemies you need to worry about. As I said, the Dune Raiders can be pretty tough, but usually you just have to keep on top of them. You can manage them. They won't overwhelm you unless there's a massive swarm of them somehow. Immortals, on the other hand, have a higher ranking of armor, have more health, are pretty good at killing guys who are in front of them, blocking them, so you can't stall them for too long. And on top of that, even when they die, they leave behind a mummy, which is pretty weak and easy to kill, but if you just barely killed him just before he escaped, and then the mummy comes out and you don't have anything to deal with the mummy, then obviously that mummy's going to run right through the exit. Before, it was advisable that we used mage towers, even if they were not exactly the best for DPS for cost. But now that we have to deal with Immortals, it is essentially mandatory that we need to use mage towers to deal with them. Essentially, anything physical that hits this is going to deal less damage, and it's going to be reduced by a certain percentage. I don't know why, but annoyingly you can't actually see the exact percentage. But while that might not sound like that much of a big deal, it really is. Try taking down one of these guys with only archers and barracks, and you'll see how horrible it is trying to deal with armor without any way to get through it. So how do you get through it? Well, I kind of just gave you a hint there. This is what the mage towers are useful for, because magic is obviously not a physical thing, it goes right through armor. So you really have to use mages to deal with these guys. I also hadn't mentioned the artillery yet, and that's because I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit unclear on how it works, because I'm hearing conflicting opinions. I've heard that apparently explosions from artillery go through half of armor, but still are resisted by the other half. And just going by feel, by how it feels to use artillery against armored enemies, I think that's correct. But I've also heard some people saying it goes completely through armor and some people saying it doesn't go through armor at all. So I don't know really who to trust there. But personally to me, it does feel like it goes halfway through armor. A quick little side note while I'm talking about armor too, is that there's this thing in the game called true damage. And I don't know why, but I don't think they actually ever explain it. But essentially, true damage is damage that can't be reduced by any kind of resistance. Because you're going to see in a moment, you can also find magic-resistant enemies, which they can only resist magic and only magic, which is kind of specific. But obviously, because you use mage towers to get through armor, it kind of still causes a bit of a problem sometimes. True damage doesn't care if you're magic-resistant, got armor, whatever, you're taking that much damage. And generally, any fire-based attack is considered true damage. So Rain of Fire will go through all resistances, although other types of attacks can deal true damage too. The problem is, we're still getting swarms of enemies, so we still need artillery, and we still definitely need barracks to hold people in place. At first, it would seem the only tower that we can kind of get away with not using so much are the archers, which already kind of hurts because archers are pretty good in the early game because they deal a decent amount of damage per second, have a good amount of range, and are nice and cheap. But, we can live without them. We can not use archers. Except for one more issue. Immortals aren't the only new enemy on this stage. There's also this second tier version of the Sandhounds, and these versions have more health, are much better at killing soldiers, so you can't block them for too long, and most importantly, have a pretty high resistance to magic. It does say medium, but for this early game point, having a medium resistance to magic is pretty high. Artillery is very prone to missing its shots against these guys since they're so fast, so we'd have to use either mage towers or archers. And with the smaller walls, we could kind of get away with using the mages like archers because, well, they didn't have any magic resistance. They would die in 1 or 2 shots. But now we're forced to use archers because nothing else is really going to be very consistently good at fighting off these wolves. So this is probably the first stage where I'd say it would be extremely difficult to do this without using one of every tower. The problem is now that we've unlocked level 3 upgrades, and this level clearly intends us to use them, we're kind of stretched pretty thin with our money. We absolutely need multiple barracks to store the immortals and stop the wolves from running right through our defense. We still need artillery to deal with the fact that there are hordes and hordes of desert thugs, which are pretty weak, but at the same time, there's so many of them that we really do kind of need some splash damage. We absolutely need mages, otherwise the immortals will just walk right through and just destroy us. And the one tower we thought we could do without, archers, are going to be pretty necessary to deal with these tier 2 wolves. It is really hard to balance your money between all these things that we need to maintain. It is kind of helped a little bit by the fact that the wolves always come from one path and the immortals always come from another. So you can kind of specialize your defense on the 2 different paths. But even still, it's quite tough. This is where microing becomes very important. It's going to be very important to use reinforcements to stop wolves when they're getting through your barracks, and to use Rain of Fire to get through the armored enemies, since Rain of Fire deals true damage. Oh, I should also mention this probably would be a bit easier if I wasn't calling every wave early. You can call waves early in this game and it will recharge your abilities faster, as well as giving you bonus money. And I know it's a bad habit, but I'm just conditioned to send every single wave as soon as I can. I just rush every single time. And to be fair, I think I'm pretty good at managing with rushing it. But yeah, I probably shouldn't rush it so much, and I'd probably do better if I didn't rush so much. It's something I'm trying to get better at, but it literally, it feels so wrong. It feels like I can just feel all the gold draining from my pockets, watching that gold wave button slowly go up and up and up. Because the longer you wait to call it, the less bonus money you get. To be honest, I genuinely believe that rushing was probably better than waiting because of how much you got for rushing. You got bonus money, you got extra abilities, it's great. But then I realised that even if you wait a pretty long time to call a wave early, and still call it early, you don't really lose that much of the gold bonus or the ability cooldown bonus. So I really should get more into the habit of waiting until the circle's half full before I call it. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do things the hard way and try and find a way to deal with the impossibly hard circumstances I created for myself. Okay, not impossibly hard. I'm being melodramatic. They will get impossibly hard. Let me just speed this up while I show you the rest of this winning attempt so you can see how I did it. I'm going to make some sounds to fill the dead air while... Okay, I think... Is it done yet? Okay, right, okay. It appears to be done. And now we finally get access to our first tier 4 tower. In fact, 2 of them. We unlock the Crossbow Fort and the Assassin's Guild, both of which are very useful. Crossbow Fort will massively increase the range of the archers and make them deal more damage, of course, and also shoot faster. And they have 2 special abilities. One is Barrage, where every now and then, I actually don't know the cooldown time, they'll shoot a sudden barrage of 8 or 10 or 12 bullets. I think you can upgrade it to make it do more, to deal a massive burst of damage. The other ability, though, is especially interesting, Falconer, which at first it just makes the tower's range 10% larger. But then as well as that, every single other tower, which is completely inside the range of that archer tower, also gets the range boost. So you can give mass buffs to all of your towers, although it is only in range. Crossbow forts are pretty vanilla as far as tier 4s go, but still very versatile and very fun to use. They're basically just good range, good attack speed, good damage. The only thing that really holds them back is, well, they don't really get through armor very well, as all archers have a problem doing. Other than that, this is kind of your all-rounder, I just need some damage tower. On the other hand, we have the Assassin's Guild. This obviously turns your soldiers into assassins who are weaker on the armor, but they get a few unique benefits from being assassins. They gain the ability to have, I believe, before you upgrade anything, it's a 30% chance to dodge any attack that hits them and instead hit the enemy back with a counter-attack that does more damage than a normal attack. And besides just better stats as well, a lot of people might have thought that's all they do. But there is one other thing the Assassin's Guild does, which is a great example of little things that I love about Kingdom Rush. Because one of the few things that I love is that most of the time, when you unlock a new tower, the new level shows off why the specialties of that new tower are useful. And this is a perfect example of that, because in this level, you're going to start seeing shadow archers, which are enemies which, well, they're archers, so they don't have to get close to your units to kill them. They can just sit at a distance and fire arrows at them while your units helplessly sit there just getting pelted with arrows until they die. And usually these things are the absolute bane of your barracks. Because unless they get close enough to where you can just move your soldiers on top of the archers, like move them away and then move them back, and then they are close enough to the archers to actually fight them in melee combat, unless you can do that, these guys basically just sit at a distance and pick off every single last one of your soldiers without them being able to do anything. And usually because you position your barracks at a choke point, usually wherever they're sitting will be just out of range of the choke point. They're probably still getting shot at by a few towers, but it's not quite as good as if they were actually in the center. Why am I talking about all this? Because the assassins have one niche, but in this level, very useful ability, which is that unless they are moving or in the middle of a fight, so essentially while they're standing still, they are invisible, which means that archers can't shoot them. If they're already engaged in a fight, then they'll be visible and the archers will shoot at them. But if you just have archers coming towards you and you have an assassin standing there, they won't actually shoot at the assassin because they can't see them. They'll walk forward into the assassin's melee range and then the assassin can actually fight it one-on-one. Besides that, the Assassin's Guild has 3 different special extra abilities you can unlock, and they are quite interesting. Well, there's Sneak Attack, which isn't so interesting. It's essentially every now and then you perform a stronger attack that deals more damage. And the more you upgrade it, the better the attack gets. But then the other 2 are especially interesting. There's Pickpocketing, which allows you to get a chance of stealing money from your enemies every time you attack them with an assassin. And although this is very greedy and kind of hard to set up, if you can set yourself up in the early game with an Assassin's Guild with Pickpocketing, you can really make a lot of extra money by abusing that mechanic. And of course, the counterattack I mentioned, you can upgrade it so that it's more likely to happen and you'll deal more damage back to someone after performing a counterattack. And I believe when it's fully upgraded, you have it's either 60 or 70% chance of dodging. So although usually I don't like to rely on these luck-related abilities, considering that your assassins are going to get attacked a lot of times, and considering that you can get the percentage chance of them dodging to over 50, it's actually well worthwhile in my opinion, and hardly even luck-based, honestly, considering that it's something that is going to be happening a lot and you have a very high chance of triggering. Overall, I do think the crossbow fort is something that you're going to use later on in the game quite a lot. It's not like a crazy OP tower or anything, but it's just very reliable, especially for dealing with flying enemies, which we're going to be introduced to on this stage, which, by the way, is the kind of thing that this stage does to show you what the crossbow fort's good at. The assassins are a bit of a mixed bag. I used to think they were really, really good, but then I kind of came to realize that compared to the other tier 4s we've had in other games for barracks, it's not as crazy. But Barbarian Mead Halls in Kingdom Rush 1 literally were the single best single target damage output in any Kingdom Rush game, I think. So they were pretty strong. A lot of people like the Paladins in Kingdom Rush 1 as well for how ridiculously resilient they were too. Although I personally always felt they were a little bit underwhelming compared to the Barbarians. Yes, they can live for ages, but you only have 3 of them. So if they can't kill their enemies, then they'll just sit there blocking 3 enemies and no more than that forever. Anyway, and then of course, in Kingdom Rush Origins, the barracks are more overpowered than ever, to the point where you can beat Kingdom Rush Origins on Veteran with nothing but barracks. So in comparison, you could look at this and think the Assassin's Guild is bad, and I could kind of understand. but I definitely wouldn't call it bad. It's more just balanced good, because honestly, the barracks in the other games were just kind of genuinely maybe a bit stronger than they should have been allowed to be. Although you've traded away your armor to get these assassins, and although they don't deal that much damage to say you've done that, the counterattack is well worth it, and you'll be surprised with how resilient these guys are with the counterattack. Because if you think of it like armor, it's like you have a 60% chance of just negating all damage. So that's like you reduce all damage by 60%, because 60% of the time you'll take no damage. So when you can think of them as having 60% damage reduction from all targets because of that, that kind of puts into perspective why I think they are pretty good, actually. I didn't even mention yet, that's not the only reason why assassins are good on this level. You see, the other thing you might want to do on this level is you might think, wait, why am I using barracks in the first place? Let me just use towers. I mean, yeah, usually barracks are really good, but honestly, a lot of the enemies in this level are really nasty towards my units. There's the flying units, which can just go fly right over my barracks, and as well as that, artillery can't fire at flying units. And of course, there's the archers. So it feels kind of pointless to have a barracks. Maybe I'll just not use one. Which of course would be a bad thing to think if you're in a level that just gave you a new shiny barracks upgrade. Well, the way they got around that is by introducing the Dune Terrors. These things are pretty unique enemies that on their own aren't that deadly, but they burrow underground where no tower can shoot them. And the only way you can get them out of the ground is by forcing them to fight someone. So that basically means without any units on the ground to stop these guys, it is literally impossible to kill these things. So you really need to use barracks, unless you're really going to try and rely on nothing but reinforcements to deal with all of them. I didn't even mention yet, this level has a pretty cool gimmick to it, besides just the unique building over there, which you can use to recruit allies to fight for you. Kind of like a barracks, but you have to pay for each soldier, although you do get much stronger soldiers than in a barracks from there. But then as well as that, this level has a giant Dune Terror, a giant sandworm that occasionally the ground will start to tremble, and if you don't move your units out of the way in time, it will burst out the ground and eat everything there alive. This isn't an enemy, so you don't have to fight it. You can't shoot at it anyway or damage it. Instead, this is a hazard that you have to use to your advantage. It will generally target your units, but it will also eat enemy units if they're there when he pops out. And of course, you have the ability to move your own units. So you can bait the worm into bursting out in an area where there's loads of enemies and just move all your ally units out of the way before it pops out, so that it only kills enemies for you. As for how I beat this level, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I did it, the bad news is how I did it. Because this is the first bit where I might have to do something that, if you're extremely purist, you might consider a little bit cheaty. You see, I found this a little bit too difficult to do as it was to get 3 stars on. If I sat here for a while and tried, I could probably get 3 stars, but I really couldn't be bothered to do that. So I beat this with 2 stars, but then I wasn't going to let it just stay like that. So I went back into the level, having already gotten those 2 stars to get the 3rd star. And of course it was easier then. 1, because I just unlocked Captain Blackthorn, the first hero so far that I've unlocked that usually you would have to pay to get, but of course, as I mentioned in the Steam version, all the heroes that are usually paid are now free, and just you have to unlock them. So not only did I now have Captain Blackthorn, which I technically shouldn't be able to have him the first time I try this level, but as well as that, I of course have 2 more stars to add to my permanent upgrades. So yeah, I have a few advantages that I couldn't have possibly had on my first time trying this level. That being said, it's not like I broke the game, and this is why I'd say that only real super purists would probably consider this cheating. At the end of the day, I'm going back into the level to get it perfect, because before I didn't. So when I got 2 stars, I essentially just decided that I'd been going the wrong direction in trying to focus on getting my artillery up to level 3 really quickly, and also I'd been going the wrong direction in trying to get the assassins up super quickly to get the money from the pickpocketing. I was being too greedy. I'm really bad for that. I really like to try and set up pickpocketing early, and yeah, I died for it a decent amount of times. What I instead wanted to do was get a crossbow fort, and I mean I was already getting one, but instead get one right off the bat. Start with nothing but a crossbow fort, then get your barracks, then get your artillery, and only upgrade your artillery to level 2 to start off. You see, I realised that artillery was the weak link here. I needed mages to deal with the immortals, I needed barracks to deal with the sandworms, the dune terrors, and I needed archers to deal with the flying enemies. Even though the mages could shoot the flying enemies, they wouldn't be anywhere near as effective as the archers at killing them. And there would be a decent amount of them appearing at the same time as normal enemies that would be distracting the towers, so I would need that extra firepower. The only thing I kind of didn't need was the artillery. Only you probably noticed from watching this footage that I kind of did need the artillery because, well, you see that there's often swarms of enemies all clustered around this choke point. And it just seemed logical that I need an artillery here. But the one thing that can do crowd control anywhere near as good as an artillery is a crossbow fort. Even though it doesn't actually have splash damage, it just deals damage so fast that sometimes it can be surprisingly good at dealing with crowds. So although I still needed an artillery, I didn't need quite as much artillery if I just got a crossbow fort early on and started getting more archers. So why was artillery the weak link, besides just the fact that it obviously doesn't go fully through armor, but it's better than archers are at dealing with it? Well, the artillery was the weak link here because almost every single enemy in this level had something that needed a specific tower to deal with it, and there wasn't anything that needed artillery, really. As I mentioned, immortals needed mages to deal with them, the flying enemies needed archers, and the dune terrors needed barracks. There wasn't anything that I needed an artillery for. It was just that the splash damage was really nice against the hordes of enemies. And in fact, the artillery was terrible at dealing with the immortals because, of course, they have really high health and there weren't swarms of them. And it was terrible at dealing with the flying enemies because it can't shoot flying enemies. And those seem to be my biggest two problems. So yeah, I basically just put the artillery on the back burner a little bit. Still get one, but don't go so much all in on it. And you can see it still doesn't go perfectly. I still lose some lives. I still only get 2 stars. But I go back into the level with Captain Blackthorn and it works a lot better. Because Captain Blackthorn, he's not technically a crazy strong hero or anything. In the mobile version, even though he is a premium hero, he's one of the ones that only costs 90p to buy. But he makes up for it with a single ability, which may be one of the most powerful abilities that any hero has. And that is that anytime anything dies near him, it gives 30% more gold. This allows me to get a lot more early game money to set up, and yeah, my second go around, I just get so much more cash, and it just carries me. Also, of course, I learned to still get pickpocketing to earn money, but don't try and rush it. It's fine to get pickpocketing halfway through the game. It's only really too late to get it if, like, you're at the last few waves. Getting it halfway through is absolutely fine. You still earn your money back, usually, and more. Oh yeah, I nearly completely forgot to mention the last new enemy in this level I hadn't mentioned yet. The giant scorpions. So, this is kind of weird, because, like, these things are usually terrifying to me. Usually, these things make it really tough for me, and technically they should be more tough to deal with than the immortals. They have even higher armor, they're even tankier, and their attacks are even more deadly because they poison people and the poison just melts their health down to 0. I remember the first time I played through Frontiers, this thing was absolutely terrifying to me and it was an absolute run killer. But weirdly enough, replaying this on Veteran, I don't know if they're just not as bad on the Steam version. These things have never been a problem. Like, I've just killed them every time I've seen them. They haven't even gotten close to getting out, I don't think, yet. Which is very strange, considering just how strong they seem to be in theory. I can only guess that they just show up so late into the waves that I already had enough money thanks to being greedy with the Assassin's Guild. I nearly said Assassin's Creed. I've been holding that back the entire video. Don't say Assassin's Creed. Don't say Assassin's Creed. Well, anyway, I'm leaving that in. So that threw me off. Anyway, I think that I just got enough money to deal with these things easily by the time they showed up, because they show up so late, and because I was earning so much money thanks to both Captain Blackthorn and the Assassin's pickpocketing. Here we unlock our next tier 4, which this time actually isn't a mage, even though that would be next in the proper order. It's an artillery upgrade. This is the Dwarp, and back when I first started playing this game, I think this may have been my favourite upgrade of all time. I still like it, don't get me wrong, it is absolutely a great upgrade, but I used to fucking love this upgrade. It is very powerful, but at the cost of, well, quite literally costing a lot. It is, of course, a 4th tier for the artillery, which is already the most expensive tower. So, of course, it costs 400 to get, which is quite a lot. And what you get out of this is a dwarven machine that causes earthquakes that damage anyone near the machine whenever they hit the ground. And also, only for a short period, but temporarily slow them to a crawl. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to make the case that the dwarf is bad. It is absolutely a good tower. However, again, just keeping in mind how expensive it is, I started to wonder if it is really worth it as much as I used to think it was, when I've been replaying it especially. Because I actually have been paying more attention to the actual damage numbers, and I noticed that you actually have your damage go down when you get the dwarf upgrade. You actually deal more damage with a tier 3 artillery per shot than you do with the dwarf. And the dwarf fires at the same speed as the level 3 artillery, I believe. So how does that work out? Well, I guess the idea is that the slight slow effect, paired with the fact that this is an earthquake, which hits literally everyone in its range, instead of being a single bullet that also has splash damage, is the idea that, like, oh, now it's worth it because, you know, you can hit more targets with this. Obviously, that can be the case. It can be more worthwhile if you've really got absolute hordes. But if you've got, like, grouped enemies, but not, like, that grouped, you might be better off with literally just the level 3 artillery. There are some situations where that will just be better than the dwarf. I think the important takeaway here is that unless you're dealing with massive hordes, it's a bit of a waste of money to get a dwarf if you're not going to get any of its special upgrades. You see, this is where the dwarf actually becomes the god tier tower I remember it being. Both of this thing's special upgrades, once you've already gotten it to tier 4, are very, very useful and very powerful. The core drill costs 400 to buy, which is a lot for an extra ability after you've already paid 400 for the tower itself. But you'll understand why when you realise what it does. It's got a very long cooldown, I think it's just over 20 seconds, but every now and then, the tower will fire off a drill into the ground that then will surface and instantly kill the strongest enemy on the screen. And while that isn't going to be crazy useful right now, later into the game when you start seeing some truly massive enemies that are just stupidly difficult to kill, it is going to be really useful to be able to just send a drill to instantly kill them even from full health. The only restriction with this is it cannot insta-kill bosses, because obviously that would be stupid. But even the biggest of enemies, as long as they are not literally a boss fight, will instantly die to the core drill. Once you get the first upgrade, it halves its price down to 200, and each subsequent upgrade only reduces the cooldown. On its own, this might still seem a bit underwhelming, but if you get into a situation where you have a map where you have a lot of money, honestly more than you could ever want, but there's just so many enemies that you're still struggling, and the enemies are just so tanky, you still think you might die, a good strategy is literally just to spam dwarfs and get core drill on all of them. Because while one core drill can be pretty unreliable because it's got such a long cooldown and it might hit the wrong enemy, and if it hits a bad target, then it's a massive waste. If you've got 3 of them active at once, all with the minimum cooldown, although that's very expensive, it does mean that your defense will be practically impenetrable. But core drill isn't even the main attraction here, at least in my opinion. I know a lot of people who play Kingdom Rush value insta-kills more highly than I do. I generally don't like to rely on them, although this is an exception because it's not a chance-based one. But personally, I think the real draw of the dwarf is Furnace Blast, which honestly, hard to say, because I obviously don't have every single one on me right now. Like, I don't remember every single ability off the top of my head. But I think this might be the single best ability you can buy for a tier 4 tower. Every now and then, the light on the dwarf will start flashing red, and the next time it attacks, it will burn the ground and leave searing fire on there, which will burn any enemies that are within the range of the tower. And even if they weren't there when the attack happened, they can walk into the fire and still get burned. This is amazing at crowd control and does a massive amount of damage. And it only costs 300 to get this ability, which I say it only costs 300. It's still pretty expensive, but you'll see, considering the strength of the ability, 300 isn't that bad. Also, can I just say that I love this level? Besides the fact that it's kind of unique because it's the only beach level, at least in the main campaign. But as well as that, it has quite a few little gimmicks that are pretty cool that it's another example of why I love Frontiers especially, and it's probably my favourite one in the series, because I feel like it gets the most love for individual things in levels. Here in this level, there are quite a few unique mechanics. First of all, there's the pirates. You can pay them to fire cannons wherever you'd like. to get some instant damage if you're about to die. But this also has a downside because regardless of whether you pay them or not, every now and then they'll fire at you. You'll see a red target appear over one of your units, and if you don't move them, they'll be blasted by a cannonball. This is a constant hazard throughout the stage, so you have to keep your eyes peeled. But I wouldn't say it's frustrating, because if it does happen, it really tends to just take out 1, maybe 2 units. So it's not something that you're likely to lose the game off of. As well as that, down here you can see we've got another special building where we can pay to train soldiers. Now, the last one I didn't really use, and that's because the 2 options we could get were just a kind of generic soldier. It's got good stats, but like we're paying 75 just for 1 soldier. And the other option was a genie, which, to be fair, is pretty strong. They have an ability where they can just flick their fingers and instantly kill something every now and then. But it wasn't necessarily the units that made that useless. The reason why I didn't use it, and the reason why it is so useless, is because of the placement of it. It's so close to being in a good spot, but where it is there, it can only really defend one path. And that one path is a path that mostly spams immortals and scorpions at you, both of which are units that are very good at killing units. And because you've paid 150 gold just for 1 genie, you really don't want to see that 1 genie die to a single immortal or scorpion. So it's kind of awkward. Although they might not technically be bad units to buy, you've got to keep them alive to get your money's worth. And it's really difficult to keep them alive when they're forced onto a path that sends enemies that specifically are good against killing units. This is a much better example of a special building like this being used. This one is in a much more useful spot towards the end of this track, in a place where there's lots of towers that you can all fire at one spot and create a choke point. But as well as that, it's also more useful because of the special unit it has this time. Once again, there's a pretty vanilla unit you can get for 75 gold that's basically just a soldier but with slightly better stats. But the other one is pretty interesting. This guy throws Molotov cocktails, and the damage from these things is actually surprisingly high. This guy's essentially an overpowered tower of his own right, but with the downside that because he isn't literally a tower, he's a unit on the track, you constantly have to make sure that he doesn't get stuck into a melee fight, because he is not so strong when he has to fight one-on-one up close and personal. And he will die pretty quickly, and obviously then you have to pay another 150 gold to get another one. This creates a pretty unique kind of playstyle for this level specifically, where I've found it's actually more than worth it to buy these guys, but you constantly have to micromanage them to make sure that they don't get stuck into a melee fight, and that you keep them alive so you don't end up wasting your money having to recruit more of them. If you can do that, these guys provide lots of splash damage for a nice and cheap price. But you might be thinking, okay, all that said, this looks like a bad spot still, because it only covers one of the paths. Well, you're going to learn later into this level that, well, this one path is the one you need to be worried about. You see, there are 2 new enemies in this level. The first one is the bane of my existence, and that is the Sand Wraith, which is way too tanky for a magic user. And they have a ranged magic attack, which is actually significant, because obviously ranged means that they don't have to melee fight your troops, so they can pick them off like archers can, but since it's magic as well, it even goes through their armor. But what really sucks about these guys is they've got such massive health bars that you can't really kill them straight away, which is what you're supposed to do, because if you let them live, they'll summon sarcophaguses. No idea what the plural of that would be. Maybe sarcophagi. I don't know, that doesn't sound right. Anyway, they'll summon those things on the track, and then hordes of mummies will come out of them. And I mentioned before that mummies aren't that tough to deal with, but when I say hordes, I mean you won't even be able to see the ground. There'll be so many of them. And as well as that, although generally they tend to just spawn them a little bit ahead of them, every now and then, I swear, I don't know if this is like a bug or if this is generally how they're coded, sometimes they'll put like a sarcophagus really close to the exit when they're not even that far through the track. Sometimes I've seen them just spawn mummies like way past all my towers, and it's like, whoa, since when could you do that? So yeah, those guys are pretty annoying. But in this level in particular, they're not so bad because, well, you just got the Dwarf. So you're going to use the Dwarf, and the Dwarf is really good at killing all those hordes of mummies. It literally does not matter how many there are, you could kill them in a few earthquakes. So while that enemy is going to become a lot more frustrating later on, for now, it's actually not too bad. The other one is technically not too bad, but there's a little special thing about it that's going to make it bad. It is the Executioner, a giant unit wielding a giant axe that is really tanky and has the ability to insta-kill soldiers. So I think that's what it says word for word on its definition. I think that basically means it can't insta-kill heroes, but it can insta-kill any other units. Now, I wouldn't be too scared of these guys, because even though they are big and tanky and they can kill units very well, they still have to kill them one at a time, so you can still stall them with units, even though it's not as effective as it could be otherwise. And they have absolutely no armor, so even though they have lots of health, it does tend to go away pretty quickly as long as you've got, like, a good defense, and these guys don't tend to spawn until pretty late on, which by that point, obviously, you're going to have a good defense. But the reason they're tough in this level is the way they show up. You see, this is the first time you're going to see something that this game likes to pull a lot. And I remember my first experience playing this level and just panicking as soon as I saw this happening. You see that little jungle over to the right? Yeah, there it goes. Yeah, that guy cuts down the jungle and makes a new path. That means that the right side is much harder to defend now than the left side. You still have to defend both sides, but I would focus more on the right side because of this. You're also kind of forced to put your towers close to the end because of the fact that this kind of attaches to the right side path close to, well, the end of it. Honestly, although this can feel like a dirty trick, at the same time, I am glad that it was an executioner that's the first enemy they send down this path, because at least it's something really slow, so that it gives you some time to react and potentially catch yourself. Now, that being said, the first time I played this level, I did not react to that in time. Well, I did react. I tried to react to it, but I didn't have enough money saved up to really do anything, and I didn't really think to panic sell to try and salvage the situation. But definitely replaying this level, this one is really fun. It's kind of a sweet spot for me. I love to replay this level, even if I've already got 3 stars on it, because it just feels like it's easy enough that it's not stressful for me, but it's difficult enough that it keeps me engaged. And as I say, it feels very different to a lot of other stages, and of course it's the stage that introduces what at least used to be my favourite tower in Kingdom Rush, and it's still definitely one of my favourites. So here we are, the last level of the first area of the game. This whole desert area ends here, with this boss fight, which I am not going to play in this video because it took me too long and I have too much to say about it, and I do not have time to continue to produce this video. So hey, see that in the next part. I'm sorry, I know it would be more satisfying if I completed the whole desert area in one video, but honestly, I'm starting to think I might make an entire video on just the boss fight level, because I have a lot to say about it. But we'll get there when we get there. See you in the next one. Bye.